Welcome back. We're going to be conquering this spread for our next project, and we're going to be putting together several different things to figure out a basic layout, and we're going to finally talk about grids a little bit. So we're going to open up back our plain document over here. We have a spread, and we kind of saw the general idea for the article. It's going to be finding the right accessories. It's going to focus on 3 main photos that are already pre-selected, and also just a few basic headlines. So we're going to start to think about the spread. How do we want the pages to interact? Do we want photos to go from one side to another? How much text do we have? This is all stuff as a designer you can plan out ahead of time so there's no surprises when you start to put everything, all the design elements together. There is some kind of basic layout, blocking, or plan that's put in place. So one thing I can do is you don't have to use grids all the time. I find them very helpful, but there's times where you can do things abstract and not use a grid, or if you want to have a sense of structure, sometimes grids can really help you in finding the right placing of different design elements. So I have a couple of photos already picked out for this. We have a plan. So a lot of times as a designer, you'll be sent a certain amount of copy or text for an article, a headline, and maybe some ideas for photos, or they may ask you to search for photos. And so this is what's good when you're trying to come up with a plan. We're going to go back to our document. We have just a simple spread here. We need to come up with a layout, structure, or basic blocking, or an idea. And a lot of times what helps me figure out the placement of all these different photos and text and headlines is to create some basic blocking using grids. So grids are going to be shown very similar to Adobe, Photoshop, and Illustrator. We're going to go up to View, and we're just going to be showing grids. We're going to go to Grids and Guides, and we're going to go down to Show Document Grid. So we're going to go ahead and click on Show Document Grid, and it's going to be a basic module grid. We can change the spacing between, this is kind of default spacing for the grid, but we can change all of the spacing and sizes of the boxes inside the grid by going up to InDesign, Preferences, and going to Grids. And we can edit this however we'd like. We can make it light blue, the color. We can make all this kind of different sizes. So we can have different subdivisions. So we're going to click on OK. We're just going to use the default grid. So this is the next step that's helpful, is putting on Snap to Grid. So we're going to go up to View, go down to Grids and Guides, the same place, and we're going to do Snap to Document Grid. So now every time we bring in a photo, we can simply have it snap. So let's do an example. Let's do a rectangle. Let's say this is going to be a photo. Just kind of an example of where a photo would go. It's going to start to snap to the grid so everything kind of stays nice and you don't have to sit there and guess where the grid is. It'll just automatically snap for you. So that's going to be very helpful when planning and blocking out our layout. And you don't have to do this with every editorial spread. Sometimes you could just start to design and skip the grid stage. But for some people, it can be very helpful if they want to have a very structured layout with certain spacing, all even. We have our module grids, and we also have a snap to grid option on. We can now bring in all of our elements and figure out our basic layout. So we know we have an article. We have article headline, which will be a very short headline. We're also going to have one main focal point photo with the title on it. So I thought that would be a neat kind of spend a whole page on introducing the article title and have a really good, big, large, strong focal point image. So let's go ahead and start to get that happening here. We have our rectangle frame tool because I know eventually I'm going to want to bring a photo in here. So this will represent our photo. We can even make this a different color so we can really get an idea of where that's going to be. So we're going to have a photo there. We have 2 other smaller photos, so I'm just going to hold down Option and drag just to duplicate what we just created. And we have 2 other photos that we need to somehow help tell the story of the article, but also to break down the article. So we could have our two photos equally spaced here, and we can have our column of type and basically the article on the bottom. What's great about being able to maybe shift these around is we can break up the text by maybe perhaps having kind of this diagonal layout where you have one on the top and one on the bottom. This will give the text a chance to flow a little bit more instead of just being one big block of copy. It'll help to kind of intermix the photography and the article, making it a more interesting read. So far I'm thinking I want to kind of make these boxes as such, so I can kind of have kind of an intermixing. I just thought it'd be kind of an interesting layout. But you can do whatever you want as a designer. You can have lots of different layouts that work. Another thing we can think about, I can make this a different color just so I can see all the different colors. I can see them overlapping. Another thing you can do as a designer, especially with grid layouts, is overlapping grid elements to create kind of some really good tension. So we can bring this over on top of our main focal point and kind of have a little bit of overlapping with that photo. So you kind of have this interesting play on elements. They're not all perfectly separated. There could be some playful things you can do with having them interact. And since this is snapped to the grid, I can move these around and I know it's going to always snap to that module grid, which is kind of nice to know. And I'm keeping a nice clear margin here. I don't want to put any type past my margin. Just to kind of give the text some breathing room. We don't want to have any text bleeding in or vital information of a photo to get into the margins. The margins will just be plain and empty. Of course, you can have a photo bleed into the margins, but keep the really important parts of the face or focal point of the photo away from the margin.